Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited today to be able to have this discussion about the housing costs the costs that impact first-time home buyer housing opportunities in Orange County. I'm really excited to be able to introduce our two speakers from the home building industry. Eric Nelson currently serves as the Vice President of Community Development at Trumark. He's been involved in land use planning, entitlement, and development for over 2 decades. Eric has handled the entitlement and development of technically complex and politically sensitive projects in jurisdictions across California, and he's a member of the Planning Commission for the City of Dana Point, and has been intimately involved in the Building Industry Association of Orange County and also the League of Cities of California. Our other presenter is Michael Habitz with Brandywine Homes, where he works as the offsite purchasing manager. And prior to his time at Brandywine, he worked at City Ventures, and he also has experience in working on the city side at the city of Burbank. And he is a resident of Costa Mesa and has been involved with several committees during his time as a resident there. And I'm really grateful to both of them. I realized I just forgot to introduce myself. My name is Elizabeth Hansberg. I'm the co-founder and director of People for Housing. And one of the things that we are working on in 2024 is something that we're calling the Campaign for Next Gen Homeownership in Orange County, and trying to find ways to facilitate the purchase of homes by young professionals and residents who grew up in Orange County and would like to stay here. Because as we were just discussing offline, we have hit a time of it has never been harder to buy your first home, especially in California and in Orange County. So something we want to make sure that people who are from here can stay. So that's the reason that we have decided to take that on as part of our work in 2024. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric to get started. And thank you all for joining us.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. And thanks everybody for being here. I'm really excited to talk. This is a conversation that I'd love to have. It's an important one. It's a complex one. I think the simple question is, why is housing so expensive in Orange County? There's a lot of different reasons, but primarily, one of the driving factors for home prices is the existing housing market surrounding the site. And so, when we talk housing, in my case, and mainly I think in Michael's case, we are market rate housing developers, so we build housing, and it's generally based on the prices of the housing that surrounds the project. This is generally a couple of reasons. One is we're buying land typically from land sellers, and those land sellers are valuing their property based on the values of the property that is surrounding the land that they own. And it's really market driven. And what I mean by that, or it's hyper local, what I mean by that, and I think one really good way to explain it is the city that I live in Dana Point. We have home prices that range at the high below $1 million. But we also have homes that are, start at $20 or $30 million. And in the case of my city where I live, I'm in that lower end of the spectrum, under $1 million. But within a mile away from my house, there are homes that are selling for $18 million. And so what's important, I think, in part of this conversation is to understand that home prices really are driven by the resale market. And like I said, in my city, that's a huge range. And I would imagine if you think about where you live, there's parts of your city that are more attainable than other parts. And that exists in almost every city. I mean, Santa Ana has multi-million-dollar homes that most people don't know exist, but they also have homes that are, relatively attainable still. And it's really, again, the underlying driver of home prices is the housing market that exists within your city, and more importantly, near or around the new development. I think what's really scary, and the data is coming out about last year, is that housing appreciation went up 11%. So for the haves, that means your home value and your went up at least 11%, because that's an average, obviously, and in some cases it went down, other cases it went way up. But in the total, overall, it was 11%. And in Orange County, we're at a 40%. We're the worst that we've been for housing affordability in 40 years. And that is not trending in a positive direction. It's actually going the other way. Existing home sales are 1.1% of all the home sales in Orange County over the last year. Historically, that's 3.4%. There's a lot of factors that drive that. A lot of it has to do with the Federal Reserve and their interest rate hikes. On the good side, for guys like myself and Michael, existing or new home sales represented almost 30% of all sales last year. Historically, we're at 18%. And what that tells us, at a snapshot level, is that resale homes are going to continue to rapidly increase in price because they're not being put on the market. And again, that has a lot to do with interest rates, which again helps us, but also hurts our home buyers. And for my company, and I'm going to speak on Michael's behalf, the most ideal situation for us is to have a huge pool of buyers, which means we need pricing and homes that are sub $1 million that are attainable. And that's becoming harder and harder to do because we're driven by the market. In Orange County, currently there's about 42 active projects. That's 21 less than we had last year. Again, that is a scary number when you consider that the market is driven by the availability of homes. And if the resale market isn't selling and we don't have projects, those who have homes, they're just going to increase in value. And so I think what that really means at the end of the day is what we're going to continue to see is an increase in housing prices and an increase in housing appreciation. So let's jump into the other stuff, which is fundamental stuff, and what we all have to think about as we develop homes, and that is, what does it actually cost to build a home? Michael, maybe you jump in here and talk a little bit about all the things that go into the development of housing and the cost associated with that.
Yeah, so obviously kind of going through the years, soft costs. So it's planning, it's engineering. So all the entitlements we need to receive involve reaching out to all of our consultants and building out the project to make it feasible, to make sure it functions. Then working through the city process and the layers that has. So the entitlements, environmental planning, so CEQA, which is a burden in itself for challenges and projects. My role mainly is in the infrastructure, the grading, and the improvements, which is a hard cost and has lots of unknowns. But it's something that we have to sort through to figure out if a project's feasible. And then at the end, it's the cost and the fees related to each city. Generally,
and Michael, does that vary in your experience, depending on the project and where it's at and all the conditions of the land that you're developing?
Yes, every site's different. There's no cookie cutter aspect of it. Each city has different fees, different processes, and then also different challenges in terms of improvements.
Okay, perfect. So once we get to the land development and Michael's done with his job, it sort of goes into the operational side, and the operational side being the direct housing costs. So what does it take and how much does it cost to build those homes? And so everything from the dirt going up, and that what we refer to in our industry is our direct housing costs. And direct housing costs are soft costs, architectural, engineering, all the different consulting groups that we need to engage with, electrical, plumbing, mechanical engineers, and those folks that put together the plan that then go to the city where we get our building permits. We have to obviously supervise that construction. So there's manpower, there's the actual physical costs, and then the interior finishes. And those are the things, sort of that you don't see on the outside. But interior finishes, everything from paint and flooring to countertops and cabinets, as well as appliances. So that's all part of what we include in our direct housing costs. And you can kind of see that here. There's various things that go into that. And then there's the rest, right? So the first two we covered is, usually eats up more than half of our costs to complete. The big variable in there, which we broke out for this, is land. And land is, in my, the way I like to look at land, and I think one way to talk about land is the gold, and without the land we can't build. And we are basically the market for land is not something we have a lot of control over, and it's one of the bigger pieces that we end up having to contend with is buying that land. And it really is a resource that is we don't have a lot of it, very much like any other resource. And the less of it that we have, the more expensive it gets. And that drives the final outcome, which is how much we can sell the homes for and still make a profit. And I think the thing I want to really make sure I'm communicating well is, because of the limited amount of land and the limited amount of projects, most home builders, if not all of us, are not working towards how much money can we make. We're working towards how little can we make in order to still make the project pencil and be viable for the financing piece. Because one of the more important things that we don't talk about a lot is that development takes a significant amount of capital, and we have to engage with financial markets, and our projects have to be financially viable, which is probably one of the more trickier things for us to do these days, as we focus heavily on trying to make the homes as attainable as humanly possible, which again opens up the door to more buyers. And so we're incentivized to create homes that are attainable, because the more attainable they are, the more buyers there are. And for us, having buyers is a critical component to selling a home. The next piece of it, and really what we wanted to dive into a bit, is the differences between housing typology and how it impacts the overall cost, and at the end of the day, the price. And in housing, one of the most unique things that is rarely discussed is the differences and how those differences relate to costs. And so what you see here really is a standard 2-story single family detached home. These are the easiest to build. They're the least expensive to build, and they are the highest price. Okay, so I'm going to say that again, because I think this is really an important thing. These homes are cheap, easy, and expensive. They're rapid construction, quick sales cycle. We have very low carry costs because we can build them within 90 days and sell them quickly. The problem with this type of a housing project is it's the least attainable, because it's going to sell for the most. It means the least amount of people are going to be able to buy it. It requires a lot of land, so it's resource heavy, and it's exclusionary. And so, while we still build these, it's not what we build the most of. And and then the last bucket here, when we're going to try to get projects approved, the least dense project usually receives the least amount of opposition, which provides some guarantee that we can actually get an approval. And that unfortunately impacts the first-time home buyers quite a bit. And so for firms like myself and Brandywine, most of our projects are infill in nature, and we rarely build single-family detached homes. As we move into probably what most people think of as a starter home, we look at townhomes, and in this case, road towns, which is really up and down living. You're sharing walls, but you're not sharing ceilings. And if you're on a corner or an end unit, you get a few extra windows. But these are more expensive to build, and they have a lower sales price. The reason they're more expensive, and you could kind of see it here in the example I put up on the screen, is what we have to now build is a home that's protecting you from your neighbor. It's has a much different structure requirement. It has noise attenuation requirements, which ultimately ends up costing us more money. But it requires less land, so we can get more of these on the same amount of land that we could get on a detached single-family home. The unseen costs, however, for the buyer is, now you are not responsible for your building. The building is owned by the HOA, and you own the airspace inside that building. And so what that ends up doing is adds unseen costs or hidden costs to your home ownership by way of HOA dues. Those dues go to take care of the building, as well as all of the amenities, the landscaping, the parking lots, and anything that is not inside the building that you're in. The good news is it requires less land, like I said. The bad news for home builders is, as we densify, we start to have to overcome objections from the community who don't want to see higher density housing in their community. They like what they have, and sharing what they have is not as easy as for higher density projects. The third and most dense projects that the home builders are currently building in this region are condo flats. And what these are really a byproduct of townhomes. But in this case, and you can see it at the graphic at the bottom, is now we're living above and next to or under other homes. And what that ends up doing is it adds more cost to the construction type. So these are the most expensive to build, but they're the lowest price. The obvious challenge there is if you can't build enough of these to overcome your increase in costs, they become unviable financially. And it's just a really a mathematical equation. These are by far the most complex things to build. They're the slowest to build. So these take well over 120 days to build. And I can't sell any one of those units until the entire building is complete. And so what that actually does is it increases our carry costs because we're financing the construction, and that financing time gets longer and the costs go higher, which equal more money. The good news is it decreases costs for the HOA and the maintenance because there's more people inside that building sharing those costs. It requires way less land than even the row towns. But these generally receive the most opposition from the community. So, these are the projects that my company's building probably the most of right now. And, they've been met well with market acceptance. And these are great starter homes. My first home is similar to this. It's considered a carriage unit, but I live above, under, and next to 4 other homeowners. But when I bought my home, it was the cheapest home I could find. And, today it's unattainable. When you look at existing home prices. So that's sort of the big picture. And then kind of the last thing, I think, just to elaborate on that and show it on a graph here, what you can see here is that the most expensive to build, which would be everything to the right of the red line, to the left of the red line. The blue line is our construction cost. The green bar graph is the sales price. And you can see it here on the left where we have the highest construction cost and the lowest sales price. Where on the other side, the cheapest to build is the highest sales price. So it's a lopsided consumer product. There isn't a consumer product out there that has this component. And so one way to think about it is if you're buying a car that's safer, that's quieter, that's the most has the most protection for you, is likely going to be the most expensive or more expensive. The cheaper car, the smaller car, is going to be the least expensive, and it's also the least expensive for the car manufacturers. Where in this case, the most expensive thing to build is the lowest. We can only sell it for the least amount, and so it's an inverted business model that is misunderstood. And one of the biggest challenges facing developers this day is the idea that density is the only solution to the housing crisis. And what I would argue is that density is a solution to a point, and then it becomes an unviable solution. And where we're seeing the cap right now is right at about 29 to 30 units to the acre, which is still very dense and can be very attainable, but it's highly contingent on the land price as well as the city's fees and the process. So all that is to say that this is not an easy situation that we're in. It's again, we're at a 40-year low in housing cost attainability. I think right now we're on average, homeowners or home buyers are spending up to 52% of their income, which is far above the average. The average is closer to 40. And so we are seeing that it hasn't been that bad since 1982, I think was the last time it got this bad. The last thing I want to show is just from a perspective, we talked about it, but when you look at that building at the top and you look at the building at the bottom of the graph here, they look very similar to the average person. What you don't see is that there's more units in that top building, and the price point, you can look on the right, you can see the market entry price is the most attainable, will look very similar to your neighbor. Entry pricing currently is about $450,000. The entry pricing for the road towns is upwards of 700. And so that's one of the primary drivers for us and why we look at all these different product types. Ideally, the cheaper we can get them, the better off we are. And that's been our focus for years, but it's highly competitive and it's highly complex. So that's just big overview, I think, we had talked before this, Michael, myself, and Elizabeth, about making sure that we carve out a lot of time for questions because it's such a complex topic. And so, Michael, if you got anything to add before we go to questions, jump in, or even you, Elizabeth. But I'm really excited more about answering questions and trying to, dive as deep as you guys want to go on why housing's so expensive in California and Orange County.
No, Eric, I think you did a great job. I think the one thing that, it's always the standout is the land price and profit. That really drives it purely
Yep.
from the beginning. If there is that land price, whatever it is, depending on the profit, because it's not, again, it goes back to capital and what we can find. So it's
Right.
the main two items that we really deal with at the beginning and inception of a project.
Correct.
No, I think this was great. Yeah, we wanted to leave a lot of time for questions and answers. So if anybody has questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat, or you can even unmute yourself. There's not that many of us here today. Does anybody have any questions they want to ask?
Hi, this is Saulo Amezquita with the City of Santa Ana. And this is actually one of my first, I just got promoted into in this department. So, and you mentioned that you have experience with the City of Santa Ana. Obviously, we don't have a lot of land. Actually, we don't have land. What options do you see for a city such as Santa Ana to increase home ownership when there is no spacing? And some of the ideas that I had in mind was, and I don't know the construction cycle as well, but obviously we can destroy existing rundown apartment buildings and build new projects. What is your take on that?
Yeah, great question. And congratulations on your promotion. Santa Ana has, I've built, a couple hundred homes in Santa Ana in the last 6 or 7 years. What Santa has going for them is you have a lot of, rundown older commercial centers and industrial areas that are ripe for redevelopment. Those are certainly areas where I would target. I think the idea of taking existing housing and redoing it is a great idea. That comes with a lot of complexity because you've got existing homeowners and you have to displace them, or mainly renters would be my guess, because we typically can't go and buy out entire condo complex, but we can buy apartments. So that's a tricky question. I think on its face, what I would tell any jurisdiction that wants more housing is that they take a yes if approach towards housing, so that what we do is we start saying yes to any housing, because what's happened over time is some housing gets a yes, some housing gets a no, and the market is going to drive what housing can be built in your city. And so when developers come through the door, more specifically home builders, they are bringing in a viable project usually, and getting the local jurisdiction to a yes is critical. What my belief is that what we want isn't necessarily what the city wants, but there's probably a middle ground there where we can all get something. And what I believe to be true is that all housing is good, no matter what it is, even if it's $1 million homes. If you sell, every $1 million home buyer is usually moving from some other housing, and they're opening up that housing when they move into new housing. It's not ideal. I'm not promoting $1 million homes. I don't think that's our solution. What I believe our solution to be is we need to take a position, or decision makers need to take a position of all housing is good and should be facilitating housing construction at all costs.
So what are some of the challenges that you have encountered? Not just, and I know that City Ventures, it's quite a few projects here in Santa Ana. Well, what challenges are you guys, as developers, what challenges are you encountering as you deal with city or municipalities?
It varies. So, one of the probably bigger conversations that it would be worth having at some point is, in Orange County, we have 33 different cities, 33 different sets of rules, 150 different policy makers. And so, every project we do is a one-off project. And so that is a challenge for production home building, is we basically have to redesign everything we do every city we go into. And that's an issue that I don't think we can fix. So going back to your question, what are the challenges? Challenges, vary from tough land sellers to neighborhood opposition and everything in between that, as well as the regulatory environment, most of which isn't the city's regulatory environment. It's CEQA, it's the state water boards, it's DTSC, it's, the list is lengthy. And I can't tell you specifically, that there's one bad, and bad's the wrong word, one group that's more challenging than the other. I think Michael mentioned it, but every site is so unique and specific. They bring their own challenges. I mean, challenges that we face, that aren't city issues are things like topography and land seller requirements. Those are things that you guys have no control over. The things that cities have control over are the process, impact fees, permit costs. Those are things that you have at least an opportunity to take a look at. Santa Ana, one of the challenges that we have to contend with in Santa Ana is your inclusionary ordinance and your politics, which aren't you, obviously. And the politics in Santa Ana are not easy. It's a diverse group of decision makers. And I think recently there was a project that got approved at Planning Commission and denied at City Council. What that ends up doing is that translates through the industry, and the concerns from the capital markets are, how much money are we going to invest to get a denial? And so the amount of surety that we have around any project helps ultimately produce more housing. If it's more of a sure thing that we're going to get a entitlement, then we're more likely to invest the time and energy into trying to obtain that entitlement. And so cities that have a track record of denying housing, and I don't think Santa Ana has a track record of denying housing. There's plenty of cities that do, but if they have history of denials, it adds caution to the wind, then caution that we have to think about when we're pitching these big projects to our investment teams.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think a lot of that, Salo, I know from my time at City Ventures, a lot of work was done on Harbor Boulevard. I think all that work wouldn't have been where it was if wasn't the city had a corridor plan kind of outlining what they wanted. So that intent is a signal to us. This is what they want to see there. And then I think it's really about kind of a flexibility on some of those things. I know Eric brought up the affordable component of it that ends up kind of, in essence, being a tax on the land as well. But just kind of signaling to developers through plans, through communication, that's all very helpful and kind of helps us feel more comfortable about making that investment, because it is very capital heavy to do that. And again, like Eric said, nobody wants a denial.
Thank you.
Yeah, you got it. Thank you. It's a good question. And so we have one in the chat here from Mara Cruz. It's a great question about ADUs and the value proposition for us to build those for homeowners. And we have been looking at that in several projects. We're including ADUs, and in some cases it makes sense. In other cases it doesn't. On the challenge with selling ADUs is you're, at the end of the day, you're increasing the cost of the housing that is being purchased, because we can't build the same house with an ADU for the same house without an ADU. And so the question that we have to ask ourselves is there enough value in adding the ADU that people will be able to overcome the higher price because they'll be able to monetize their home. And in some cases it works really well. The lending process for that has gotten better, where the home buyers are able to estimate or at least underwrite the purchase with income. And so it helps reduce down their monthly costs, which may, in some cases, make a home that they could buy and finance that's reliant on that income that would be produced from an ADU. So the simple answer is yes, we can do it. The more complicated is not on every project. Hopefully that answered your question, Mara Cruz.
I'm curious if she might have been asking also about the new law that allows you to now sell your ADU separate from the freestanding house, which I
Right.
think in like a master planned community would be, or a specific plan would be hard to do. I mean, do you think?
Yeah. So I mean, the nuance of selling off a piece of your land is the subdivision process.
Right.
And in the case of a project that we're proposing, if we're subdividing it at that time, the nuance of that is that the jurisdiction may count that as a unit, which may actually put us over the density, even though it's not counted technically. The ADUs are still something that most cities are grappling with. And in most cases, haven't heard of one city, at least in Orange County, that's adopted the legislation that would allow you to subdivide your ADU. That I think
Or
the
sell your
law
ADU,
currently is
yeah,
set up that
separately.
you have to include that, the city has to add that to their code. It's not a right that exists unless the city's decided to allow it. And I haven't seen
Right.
a city that's been willing to include that in their zoning
Okay.
either.
Yeah, because last year there was a law, I can't remember the number, but yes, there was a law that cities have to opt in, quote unquote,
Correct.
to
Correct.
making that be possible. I mean, I think from my perspective as someone who, I see right now new construction as, probably the best option for first time home buyers. Just because I think, you know, existing home sales, people that are locked in a low interest rate or have a paid off house are not eager to move. And so new construction, I think, really is where the opportunity is. Um, and I think that when I think about those first time home buyers, those aspiring homeowners, I think about people that are probably on the younger end of, they're certainly less than 50. Most of them are probably under 40,
Right.
and they're looking to have families and have space to raise their families and build their families and their lives in Orange County. And so when I think about an ADU being sold separately, it could be great for the boomer aged or Gen X age homeowner who is, cutting off the back half of their parcel and selling it. But it's not probably going to be a home that you're going to have room for a family. I mean, it'd be hard to raise a couple of kids in a 500 square foot ADU. Not that people don't do that. I think people are living in all kinds of creative and overcrowded conditions these days, trying to just afford the rent. So I don't mean to say that it's not happening, but if someone's looking to purchase their first family home, I think of the townhome or even the stacked flats that you've been talking about as kind of like a great opportunity. So as far as the ability to convey your ADU separately from your your primary residence, I think it's I think it's a good option in terms of it adds more flexibility to housing stock in California. But I don't see it as a solution for the thing that concerns me, which is that we're losing our young people to other states because they can't see themselves building their lives and their families in Orange County.
Yeah, I think that's right. I
Yes.
mean, I think the other component, I think a question that must be asked that doesn't get asked very often, and I think ADUs are a really good, is good. Our ADUs are great. I go that far. However, when you think about people who own homes, the vast majority of homeowners didn't buy their home to then sell or rent off a piece of their backyard to a stranger. And, it's a societal conversation that needs to be had. And, the reality is if you bought a home 10 years ago, you don't need the income. It's extra income. And, many people, once they start the process of trying to obtain permits for these things, just walk away because it is not an easy ask, even though the legislature's done some good work in trying to fast track approvals and streamline things. And there's many jurisdictions that have really done some unique things like developing pre-made plans that are ready to go. And as long as you got space, you're good to go. All of that still means that they're going to have to invest a significant amount of money to build a very small ADU, and they're going to have to share. And sharing is probably the challenge that as a society we struggle with very often. But I think more ADUs is good. If, we can add, a couple of ADUs to every block in Orange County. That's a lot of ADUs. And in
Indeed.
many cities, you're seeing that. You're seeing, you're seeing increased housing stock with ADUs. But I don't think it's going to be enough to offset the dearth of housing that we currently have in Orange County. It's one of the many things we should be promoting and doing.
Right. It's one of the
So-
tools in the toolbox.
Yep.
So guys, I've got a two-pointed question here, I guess, or maybe two separate questions. This is Billy Hughes from Irvine Community Land Trust.
Hey, Billy.
Hey, as a developer who had spent most of his career outside of the state, the entitlement process and the CEQA process and the governmental processes out here are they're mind-blowing, to say the least. There is there are a lot of costs you can control in the design and build of your product. The things you don't control, land, because that's market driven. You've got construction costs, which is market driven. But there are things like governmental process that hopefully, I think that's the big delta between building in Orange County and building in, Spartanburg, South Carolina.
Yep.
The idea here is, what can we do to maybe streamline a CEQA process? And this is question number one. Maybe eliminate a lot of the costs associated with CEQA, because I see a lot of the costs in the land carry as well. Obviously, as you're walking through the entitlements in the process. And then the second question, how has RENA, or the housing element, helped you guys? I know on the for rent side, it's kind of helped us in the process, but how does it help on the for sale process?
Great questions. I'll start, and then Michael, maybe you close out. But as it relates to CEQA, clearly CEQA is a major issue for any development in California. I think most recently what you saw up in Berkeley with student housing, where they were, the state or the college was, challenged over their student housing over a noise issue under CEQA. And, the legislature acted on that, and they gave them they carved out and added an exemption for them. I think, my position is, exemptions are great. The challenges with exemptions is they're not exempt from CEQA challenges. And until we address the litigation portal that has been created through CEQA, I don't know that you ever get anywhere else. I think it was in 1980, Jerry Brown said that CEQA reform was God's work, but it needed to happen. And what we've seen is a lot of CEQA changes, but CEQA has not gotten that easier. It's gotten more complex. And while they've added all these great carve-outs, they haven't added those that are most important, which is limiting my exposure in a CEQA lawsuit, because we don't get to decide what CEQA document we prepare. We're told what to prepare, and then when those projects are challenged, we are on the hook to solve those, to find a solution or litigate. I think one scary statistic was last year we built roughly 120,000 homes. 48,000 homes were challenged under CEQA across the state. And so almost half of our production was challenged in court. And those are not units that we saw built. Those units will maybe be built this year. Some of them may have to go back through a process, or they may be abandoned altogether. And until we do have a significant shift here in CEQA, I don't know that there is no simple answer. And there's the other side of it, which is I think CEQA has done some tremendous things in our state. I grew up in a time in California here where we'd get stage 5 smog alerts, and it was hard to breathe, and you couldn't see downtown LA, and the beaches were dirty and the water was filthy. Our environment was out of control, and CEQA did some amazing things. And I think now we have to ask, is it valuable anymore with the way that it is? And I think many would say no, and some would say yes. So I don't know, Billy, hopefully that answers your question. As it relates to RENA has only complicated things for us. It's not made it any better. On the whole, I think on the margins it's probably helped, because what's happening is the state is forcing cities to plan for more housing. The nuance of that, if you're engaged in that process, is that the state is also, forcing density on communities that may or may not want it, but density that may be infeasible from a developer's perspective. And you go back to some of the slides I showed earlier, when we get over 30 to the unit, 30 to the acre, we can't make that work financially because it just doesn't make sense for home builders. It may make sense for apartment developers because we have different business models, but this densification, I think the term they use it up in the state or HCD is affordability by design. And the reality is that design is unaffordable sometimes to build. It may be affordable to the end user if we can actually get it built, but it doesn't ever get built. And so what RENA has done is it's taken a heavy focus off of facilitating housing and a much more paperwork for the city that ultimately means more time and more delays for us because there isn't staff to actually work on housing projects. They're working on documentation about the housing that they want. And I don't know, again, there's a simple solution there. What I would say about RENA is we're in our 8th cycle and it's not working. You can see that in the production continues to go down year over year. In 1982, they enacted the Housing Accountability Act and had provisions in there, which we're now finally being able to take advantage of, like builder remedy. But even with that, that comes with a ton of risk and backlash, and it's not an ideal way to approach, project approvals. So, in total, I would say RENA has really just one more piece of paperwork that we're subjected to in some way or some form that has the likelihood of potentially limiting development in your city.
That is not the answer I wanted.
I'm sorry. I mean, we are at the tip, right?
No,
that's the sad part.
Right.
Is we need, the problem with the one size fits all is that real estate is unique. Each piece of it is. And each issue that we deal with is a unique issue. And you cannot plan from, 500 miles away and get it right. And even the local jurisdictions struggle to plan appropriately because they're heavily reliant on consultants who are in many ways answering HCD's requirements, and they're not answering the requirements of the market. So when the policy is in control, the policy may be all you get. And it's, it's a huge issue. And it's one I think, I'd love to see some change.
Do you think the fact that when, that the RENA is broken out obviously by income level, but it's not broken out by tenure. So it's not saying, X number of these units need to be new purchase opportunities, new home buyer opportunities. Do you think that accounting for diversity of tenure, and by that I mean rental versus home ownership, would that be additive to the process to make room for, like, to set a floor for, like, the city needs to have in mind that of these market rate units, X percentage of them should be for sale property, for opportunities for home ownership?
Yeah, it's a great question. So here's my belief. This is a personal belief. I don't think that the government should be controlling the end game and dictating the value of the homes. What they take is a much different approach. I mean, I would applaud them for their efforts. I think it's all good. It's all coming from a space of wanting more homes. And I think we can't dismiss that, nor can we dismiss that our legislature has been actively trying to make housing more abundant in California through policies, and then some of them have helped. A lot of them are, the special interests get involved as soon as that legislation hits the floor. By the time it ends up getting signed, it's been stripped of all the value by special interests, including special interests I'm involved in. So I'm part of the problem in a sense, because I've engaged in that special interest process. So what would be more appropriate, I think, is a much less data-driven process. Because I guess to your question is, if we focus on gathering data, what we're not focused on is building more houses, or planners who are focused on trying to make housing developments work. What they're focused on is gathering data to give to the state to, you know, essentially output an outcome that may not work on a particular piece of property because the landowners don't care. And so I think, you know, there's a lot of stock put into the value of planning for housing. But again, we're on our 8th cycle. They're 8 years long, and we are at worse than we've been in 40 years. And so I don't
we're on
think
our
that
6th.
would help. I'm sorry, 6. Yeah.
No, that's okay.
6. We're on our 6th cycle, 6 of 8th year. Right. It started in 82 when with the Housing Accountability Act, and it hasn't gotten better since.
See, as a planner by training, I want to believe in the planning process.
Yeah.
And as someone who's put a lot of effort into housing elements over the last several years, yeah, but I hear what you're saying.
I'm not saying that they don't work sometimes.
No, right, but I hear what you're saying, that
the process has gotten to the point where, you know, cities can't get their housing elements approved because they can't answer the question or provide the thing that the state wants. And you have policymakers on both ends of the spectrum, and we see this, you know, these intra-governmental fighting, and that's what RENA has created, is, you know, a significant amount of fights and process to cities that are now engaged in a back and forth with Sacramento, and that takes time away from the time I get to spend with them to try to make my projects get through the system. And so those delays are real, right? Delayed housing is denied housing. So every month we don't, you know, every week is a month, every month is a year. I mean, it adds up very quickly. And with rapid appreciation, our focus should be on building enough homes to stop the appreciation. That would be the most ideal outcome. There's not going to be a policy that I think would come out of any of this process that would reduce the value of existing housing. Because if you think about our society, what homeowner is going to agree to that or support the politicians and the policymakers that reduce the value of the home that they already own? And so the only thing we can do is stop the massive, rapid, out of control appreciation. And the only way to do that is to build enough housing so that there's options
to stay ahead of it. Yeah.
To stay ahead of it, or at least stop it so that over a period of time we can catch up. Right. And until we do that, all our policies should be focused on yes. And not on whether it's the right kind, the right shape, the right color, the right size, the right price. You know, the automobile market is a great example. We don't do this to automobile manufacturers. We don't tell them what to build, how to build it, what color it is, how many wheels, how many seats, right? And we have cars at all income levels. And we have many auto manufacturers that are focused on high-end cars. And then we have others that are focused on more attainable cars. And then we have a robust used car market. And what the car manufacturers don't have to do is get an approval to drive that car in every little city that they go through. And until we see that and acknowledge that, I don't know that, you know, we're going to be anywhere different, you know, 40 years from now, other than worse off. It's a long-winded answer. I have to think about this quite often, as you can.
I know you do. That's why I asked you to speak.
Michael, sorry, please weigh in.
No, I think it's great points. I mean, I think your metaphor about cars kind of hits it home. We know who the home buyers are. We know what products are going to work. If not, we wouldn't invest the time. So being kind of forced into a density or a product type sometimes works against us. Right. Especially, you know, when you know that doesn't work. And for the type of construction that we do, right? You know, there's a cost to that. And then there's a type of construction, whether it be podium or like traditional frame lumber, 3-story. Certain densities work in certain places in certain markets. So,
yeah. I mean, I think the one closing point I would make is that what we know how to do really, 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 really well is build homes. What we aren't really good at, and is one of our biggest challenges, is everything that goes into the ability to build those homes. And that's the process. And that is a cumbersome, challenging. I think, Billy, you mentioned it. I mean, you're a transplant from somewhere, anywhere but here. It's fairly easy to build homes. And it's just not easy here.
It is definitely not easy here, but it's it's needed, and we are not giving up the fight, because I know that you're going to continue to build homes in California.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think the scariest thing, or the potential scariest thing is, home builders and most of the publics build, somewhere upwards of 70% of our homes in California. And at some point, those public companies are going to decide it's not worth it. And when we lose that development power, and that robust field of expert builders, it's really going to be challenging. And hopefully we never get there. Hopefully they all see the value in being here. We see the value in building in California. As hard as it is, it's still a good place to do business. And more importantly, we get to actually see people get their first home. We get to see families grow. We get to see the intrinsic things that come with housing, which, we can take, we often get, put in these buckets of greedy developers, but we're all humans. We all work here for a reason. And I work here because I get to see those smiling faces and those families grow, and, locking in their wealth building. And I think that's such an important thing, that it's worth being here and doing this for me personally.
Yeah, I agree. I care about the next generation of Orange County residents and the young people that have grown up here and want to stay and build their own family here. And because we have such a high quality of life, if we don't make more room by building more housing, people will be displaced. People will be pushed out, because there's always going to be people, I think, that are going to want to live here at some level. And I just don't want to see that happen. So that's a lot what drives me in the work that we're trying to do to make room for the next generation of homeowners in Orange County. We're coming down to the wire, but we're not there yet. Does anybody else have any other questions they want to put forward to our panelists, or any final? All right, well then I will let you have your 5 minutes back of your afternoon, but thank you very much for this perspective. And I know Brandywine and Trumark and the other companies that got mentioned on here today, I think was City Ventures. They are unique in that they are building that infill first-time homebuyer product in Orange County, which is, as you said, an infill market, a place where the cost of what you're building is in as much dictated by what's for sale, in the subdivision, adjacent, as it is by, what you think you want to sell it for, what you think your project, who you want to market your project to. But just want to say that, we are fully committed to trying to make room for the next generation of homeowners in Orange County, and would invite you to join us in our advocacy. And when a project comes available, or you hear about a project coming online in your city, if you have a way to support it, if you can send an email to your elected officials, if you have the bandwidth to go and make public comment in support of it, I really do believe that the next generation of homeowners is going to be, at least in the next couple of years, really going to be best served by a new product. And that means that all of us that are aspiring homeowners, and the people that want to support those aspiring homeowners, have to be supportive of housing near us, right? To say yes to new housing, yes in my backyard. So we are online at ocymb.org, at peopleforhousing.org, and just want to rally the troops and make sure that if you have housing opportunities in your town, in your city, be a supporter, be a YIMBY, and say yes to housing.